Undercover black nurse exposes doctor's misdiagnosis at hospital. "No, you can't do this to her," Elaine Johnson shouted, her white nurse's uniform contrasting sharply with her dark skin as she lunged forward, grabbing the syringe from Dr. Wilson's hand. The metal tray of medical instruments clattered to the floor, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent hospital room. Margaret Cooper, a frail woman in her 70s, lay unconscious in the hospital bed, oblivious to the commotion around her. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Dr. Wilson's face reddened with fury as he reached for the syringe, his wedding ring glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Give that back right now or I'll have security escort you out." "This medication will kill her," Elaine said, her voice steadier now but still intense. She held the syringe away from the doctor, her back pressed against the window where late afternoon sun streamed in. "Look at her chart again. She's allergic to this. It's right there in her records, the ones you didn't bother to check." Thomas Cooper, Margaret's son, stood frozen in the doorway, briefcase still in hand, having just arrived from his law office downtown. "What's happening? What's wrong with my mother?" Dr. Wilson straightened his white coat, attempting to regain his composure. "This nurse is interfering with your mother's treatment. She's new here and clearly doesn't understand our protocols." "I understand enough," Elaine said, eyes locked with the doctor's. She turned to Thomas. "Your mother is being misdiagnosed, again, just like Mrs. Peterson last week and Mr. Garcia before that." She pulled a small tape recorder from her pocket. "And I have proof." The doctor's face drained of color as he recognized the device. "You've been recording me. That's illegal." "Not as illegal as what you've been doing," Elaine replied, her finger hovering over the play button. "This ends today. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Elaine Johnson arrived for her shift at Central Memorial Hospital, a place she'd been working at for only 2 weeks, though no one knew her real reason for being there. 3 hours earlier, Elaine Johnson parked her 1985 Buick Regal in the hospital staff lot. The car had belonged to her father, and despite its age, she kept it immaculate partly out of respect for his memory and partly because, as her mother always said, "Presentation matters, especially for people like us." The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of approaching autumn as she checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. At 45, Elaine's face showed the subtle lines of experience, but her eyes remained sharp and observant, necessary tools in her real profession. She adjusted her wig, making sure the straight black hair looked natural against her dark brown skin. For the past 15 years, she had worked as an investigator with the state medical board, but this assignment felt personal in ways the others hadn't. She grabbed her purse and the lunch her 16-year-old daughter had packed for her, Sophia's way of showing support for what they both knew was dangerous work. "Be careful, Mom," Sophia had said that morning, sliding the brown paper bag across their kitchen counter. "These doctors have friends in high places." Elaine entered through the staff entrance, nodding to the security guard who barely looked up from his newspaper. The headline announced President Reagan's latest speech on the Cold War. 2 weeks at Central Memorial and already the patterns were clear. Overworked staff, administrative corner-cutting, and at the center of it all, Dr. Robert Wilson. The nurse's station was busy with the shift change. Nurse Susan Parker, a white woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair pulled into a tight bun, handed out assignments. Susan had been at Central Memorial for 25 years and ran the floor with military precision. "Johnson, you're with Dr. Wilson again today," Susan said, not looking up from her clipboard. "Room 302 just came in last night, female, 73, presented with confusion and shortness of breath. Room 305 needs vitals every 30 minutes. He's still unstable after yesterday's episode." "Yes, ma'am," Elaine replied, accepting the clipboard. She'd requested Wilson's rotation specifically, though no one knew that either. Susan looked up, her expression softening slightly. "And how are you settling in? Staff potluck next week, you should come." "I'd like that," Elaine said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. In another life, she might have enjoyed being part of this team. In this one, she was here to investigate claims that Dr. Wilson was systematically misdiagnosing Medicare patients to order unnecessary procedures that were killing people. "Not as illegal as what you've been doing," Elaine replied, her finger hovering over the play button. "This ends today." She pressed play, and Wilson's damning words filled the suddenly silent room. "Just administer the medication. That's an order." Followed by her own carefully worded question laying out exactly what he was doing. Thomas Cooper, attorney at law and son of a doctor who had dedicated his life to ethical medicine, stepped fully into the room. "Who are you really?" he asked Elaine. Elaine Johnson stood straight, still keeping the syringe out of Wilson's reach. Elaine Johnson, investigator with the State Medical Board. We've been investigating Dr. Wilson for 6 months following a pattern of suspicious Medicare billing and patient complications. Wilson lunged for the door, but Thomas blocked his path. I wouldn't, doctor. That would add fleeing to the charges. You can't prove anything, Wilson said, but his voice lacked conviction. 4 patients in 2 weeks, Elaine said. All elderly, all on Medicare, all recommended for unnecessary procedures, all prescribed medications you knew were contraindicated. The pattern goes back at least 8 months that we can document. How many died, Dr. Wilson? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. You have no authority to detain me, Wilson said finally. No, came a new voice from the doorway. But I do. Officer Michael Davis stood there, his uniform crisp, his expression grim. At 55, he had the weathered face of someone who had seen too much but still believed in justice. Officer Davis, Elaine acknowledged with relief. They had worked together before, though no one at the hospital knew that. Ms. Johnson, he replied with a professional nod. I received your signal. The small panic button in her other pocket, her lifeline if things went wrong. Dr. Robert Wilson, you're being detained pending an investigation into medical fraud and endangerment. As Davis led Wilson away, the doctor's final defense crumbled into petty accusations. She entrapped me. The hospital was cutting my department's budget. Medicare doesn't pay enough for what they expect us to do. Thomas watched them go, then turned to Elaine. Thank you, he said simply, for my mother and for the others. Margaret Cooper, who had witnessed everything from her hospital bed, reached out a weathered hand to Elaine. Richard would have been proud of you, young lady. Standing up like that takes courage. Elaine took her hand, feeling the butterfly tattoo against her palm. Your generation taught mine how to be brave, Mrs. Cooper. The aftermath unfolded with the steady momentum of justice delayed but not denied. Dr. James Harris, the hospital administrator, arrived within minutes, his face ashen when Officer Davis explained the situation. More officers arrived to secure Wilson's office and records. A new doctor was assigned to Margaret's case, a younger woman who diagnosed her correctly with bronchitis, not pneumonia, and prescribed appropriate medication that respected her allergies. Elaine stayed through it all, maintaining her professional composure even as the hospital staff looked at her with a mixture of shock, betrayal, and from some grudging respect. As evening fell, she sat in Harris's office, facing him and 2 hospital board members who had been summoned for an emergency meeting. How widespread is this? Harris asked, the polished administrator replaced by a man facing his hospital's worst nightmare. Wilson is the primary target, Elaine explained. But our investigation will need to determine if others were involved or aware. We had no idea, one of the board members insisted. There are protocols that were clearly ignored, Elaine interrupted. 4 cases in 2 weeks, right under everyone's noses. The question is whether it was deliberate blindness or genuine ignorance. Harris winced. What happens now? The investigation continues. Wilson will likely face criminal charges along with the loss of his medical license. The hospital's liability will depend on its cooperation and what we find. We'll cooperate fully, Harris promised. Whatever it takes to make this right. Outside in the hallway after the meeting, Nurse Susan Parker waited, her earlier military precision replaced by genuine distress. I should have known, she said without preamble. All those complications after routine procedures, the patients who got worse instead of better, I just thought that he was the doctor and knew best. Elaine suggested gently. Susan nodded, tears in her eyes. 25 years I've been nursing, and I still deferred to his MD when my instincts told me something was wrong. Elaine thought of all the nurses she'd interviewed during the investigation, good people who had raised concerns that were dismissed, who had eventually learned to doubt their own judgment. It's not just you, she assured Susan. The system is designed to make questioning difficult, but that can change starting here. Susan straightened, some of her usual backbone returning. What can we do to help? Review all of Wilson's cases for the past year, flag anything suspicious, and most importantly, trust your instincts going forward. They were right all along. Elaine's final stop was Margaret Cooper's room, where Thomas sat beside his mother's bed. The new medication was already working. Margaret's breathing was easier, her color improved. How are you feeling, Mrs. Cooper? Elaine asked. Better, thanks to you, Margaret replied. Thomas has been filling me in on your real job. Sounds exciting. Elaine smiled. Mostly it's paperwork and interviews. Today was unusual. Will charges be filed? Thomas asked, the attorney in him needing to know the process. Almost certainly. Your mother's case provides clear evidence of intent, especially with the recording. The DA will want to speak with both of you, Thomas nodded. We'll tell them everything. Mom's always been a fighter for what's right. Like father, like son, like mother, Elaine said. Your family has made standing up for others a tradition. As she prepared to leave, Thomas walked her to the door. This kind of work, it must take a toll. Elaine thought of her daughter Sophia, who had grown up watching her mother fight battles most people never even knew were happening. It does, but then there are days like today that remind me why it matters. If you need anything for the case, any legal consultation, my card. He handed her his business card. Thomas R. Cooper, civil rights attorney. Your father would be proud of you too, Elaine said, tucking the card into her pocket beside the recorder that would help bring justice to those who had suffered from Wilson's greed. The next morning, Elaine sat in her 1985 Buick in the hospital parking lot, watching the sunrise paint the building in golden light. Her cover was blown, this phase of the investigation over. Soon she would be back at her desk, building the case that would go to court. But first, she had one more visit to make. She found Margaret Cooper dressed and sitting in a chair by the window, looking more like the civil rights fighter she had been than the frail patient of yesterday. They're discharging me, Margaret announced happily. The new doctor, Dr. Chen, says I can recover just as well at home. That's wonderful news, Elaine said, sitting beside her. I wanted to check on you before I finish my report. Margaret studied her face. You've done this before, gone undercover to catch the bad ones. Elaine nodded. It's part of the job sometimes. Must be lonely work, Margaret observed. Pretending to be someone you're not being able to tell anyone what you're really doing. It can be, Elaine admitted. But it's worth it when justice is served. Margaret's wrinkled hand found Elaine's, the butterfly tattoo a reminder of transformations and freedom. Richard and I used to host Sunday dinners for folks who were fighting the good fight, lawyers, activists, community organizers. Thomas has continued the tradition. You and your family would be welcome. Elaine felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the morning sun streaming through the window. I might just take you up on that. Later that day, as the story broke in the local news, prominent doctor arrested for Medicare fraud and patient endangerment, Elaine sat with her daughter Sophia at their kitchen table, finally able to share the details of her latest case. You actually grabbed the syringe from his hand? Sophia asked, eyes wide with admiration. That's so badass, Mom. Language, Elaine admonished, but she was smiling. And yes, I did. Sometimes justice requires direct action. Is that why you do this work? Sophia asked, suddenly serious. For justice? Elaine thought about Margaret Cooper and her butterfly tattoo, about Thomas carrying on his father's legacy, about Nurse Susan Parker finding her voice again. For justice, she agreed. But also for transformation. Sometimes exposing one wrong creates the opportunity for many rights. 2 months later, Dr. Robert Wilson pleaded guilty to multiple charges of Medicare fraud, practicing medicine with reckless endangerment, and falsifying medical records. The plea deal required his full cooperation in identifying others involved in similar schemes at other hospitals. The day of the sentencing, the courtroom was filled with former patients and their families. Margaret Cooper sat in the front row, Thomas beside her. Elaine sat behind them, Sophia having taken the day off school to witness this moment. When the judge asked if any victims wished to speak, Margaret Cooper rose, using her cane but standing tall. What this man did was steal more than money, she said, her voice carrying the same strength that had once chanted for freedom. He stole trust. My husband was a doctor who served people others wouldn't treat, who believed medicine was a calling, not a business. Dr. Wilson betrayed that sacred trust. But this case has restored my faith in the system, that when good people like Nurse Johnson stand up, justice can still prevail. Outside the courthouse, after Wilson was led away to begin his 5-year sentence, Thomas hosted an impromptu gathering at a nearby restaurant, a celebration of justice served and new connections formed. Elaine watched as Sophia engaged in animated conversation with Margaret, the generations bridged by shared values. Susan Parker and several other nurses who had come forward during the investigation shared stories of changes already happening at Central Memorial, new reporting protocols, ethics committees with real authority, a culture that encouraged questioning. Dr. James Harris approached Elaine, humbler than she had ever seen him. The board approved all the reforms we discussed, he told her. And we've established a patient advocacy office with real teeth. We're calling it the Cooper Initiative if Mrs. Cooper agrees. I think she'll be honored, Elaine said. Though knowing Margaret, she'll insist it be named after her husband. Harris nodded. The Richard Cooper Patient Advocacy Program, then, and we'd like to offer you a consulting position to help implement it. Elaine raised an eyebrow. You're offering a job to the woman who exposed your hospital's darkest secret. I'm offering a job to the woman who helped us find our moral compass again, Harris corrected. Think about it. As Harris moved away, Thomas took his place. That sounded interesting. A consulting offer, Elaine explained, to help implement new protections. Will you take it? Elaine watched the gathering past and present united in purpose, wounds beginning to heal, new possibilities emerging from what had been broken. I might, she said. There's something powerful about being part of transformation, not just exposure. Thomas smiled. Mom would say that's the real work of justice, not just tearing down what's wrong, but building what's right in its place. In the weeks that followed, Central Memorial Hospital became a model for reform in healthcare institutions nationwide. The Richard Cooper Patient Advocacy Program established protocols that were adopted by hospitals across the state. Dr. Wilson's case led to investigations at 3 other hospitals where similar schemes were uncovered. And Elaine Johnson found herself at a crossroads, considering a new direction for her career, one that built on her investigative skills, but added the dimension of reform and restructuring. 6 months after the day she had grabbed that syringe from Dr. Wilson's hand, Elaine sat in the Cooper living room for one of their Sunday dinners. The house was filled with a diverse group of community advocates, medical professionals, and civil rights workers. The tradition Margaret and Richard had started decades earlier continuing with new energy. Margaret, now fully recovered, sat beside Elaine on the sofa. So you're taking the hospital position? Part-time? Elaine confirmed. I'll still work for the medical board, but focusing more on reform than investigation. Perfect combination, Margaret approved. Catching the bad while strengthening the good. Across the room, Sophia was deep in conversation with Thomas about her interest in studying law. Civil rights work like you, she was saying, her face alight with purpose. Margaret followed Elaine's gaze. The next generation takes up the mantle. That's how progress works, not all at once, but person by person, choice by choice. Elaine thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment, how one act of courage had triggered ripples of transformation throughout the system, how Margaret's history of standing up for justice had inspired her son, who had stood by Elaine, whose work now inspired Sophia. You know what I've learned from all this? Elaine said. What's that, dear? Justice isn't just about exposing what's wrong. It's about creating the space for what's right to grow in its place. Margaret patted Elaine's hand, the faded butterfly tattoo a testament to her own transformation from young activist to elder wisdom keeper. That's the secret they don't tell you about fighting the good fight. You don't just tear down the old world. You help birth the new one. As the evening progressed, Elaine found herself surrounded by a community she hadn't known. She needed people committed to the long, slow work of making systems more just, more humane. The loneliness of her undercover days faded in the warmth of shared purpose. Later, as she and Sophia drove home under a canopy of stars, her daughter asked, "Are you glad you grabbed that syringe that day?" Elaine thought about all that had flowed from that moment of decision: justice for those harmed, protection for those who might have been next, reforms that would save countless others, and this new community that had embraced them. I am, she said. It was a small action that opened the door for much bigger ones. Like a butterfly effect, Sophia said, referencing Margaret's tattoo. One little wing flap that changes everything. Elaine smiled at her daughter's perception. Exactly like that. We never really know how far the ripples of our choices will travel. As they pulled into their driveway, Elaine thought about the case that awaited her next week, another hospital, another potential wrongdoing to investigate. But now she carried not just the weight of responsibility, but the strength of connection. She wasn't just tearing down what was broken, she was part of building what could be. Justice, she had learned, wasn't just about endings. It was about new beginnings, too. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.